Well, we're joined now by Robert Ford, who was the US ambassador to Syria during the years 2011 to 2014. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. You were, of course, ambassador to Syria at a time when President Bashar al-Assad, as he was then, looked like he wasn't going anywhere. And then today, we've seen pictures of the new leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, playing basketball in Washington, D.C. with US officials. What went through your mind when you saw those pictures of the new president in Washington playing basketball?
Well, it's amazing that Ahmed Sharaa is visiting Washington, since he was on the American terrorism list for more than 10 years. The pictures of him playing basketball, I think, are a great public relations effort. I give him credit for knowing how to appeal to Americans.
So he's in Washington holding these talks with President Trump. It's understood that the two men get along well. How can the United States best help Syria, do you think?
I think there are two things the Americans can do. First and foremost, Syria's economy has been devastated by the civil war, and the American cancellation of sanctions that Washington imposed over the years on Syria would help encourage investment, which Syria desperately needs. Its infrastructure is heavily damaged, and private investment in that infrastructure is vital, both for job creation and for rebuilding the economy more broadly. The second thing that the United States could do is to reduce tensions between the Israeli government in Jerusalem and Damascus, and find a way to achieve a sort of ceasefire between Israeli forces in Syria. It's not that the Syrians are attacking the Israelis, they are not, but the Israelis regularly attack Syria.
I'm very interested in the relationship between President Trump and President al-Sharaa, because they got off to a very good start when they met in May in Saudi Arabia. And President Trump described President al-Sharaa as young, attractive and tough, amongst other things. Lots of very glowing labels he attached to him. Now, you've met President al-Sharaa and you've known him since before he became president of Syria. I'd like to ask you, what sort of a person is he? What struck you most about him when you've engaged in discussions with him?
So I've met him 3 different times between 2023 and 2025. Sharaa speaks very softly. You almost have to lean forward to hear him. He's a thinker. He likes to engage on ideas. He is, I think, pragmatic in the sense that he is not bound to any kind of hard line or very specific ideological agenda. I think he's very much a politician, but at the same time, I don't think he's a Democrat. He does not, for example, welcome the establishment of a viable political opposition at this time in Syria, at least.
Wouldn't that be a little premature? And don't you think perhaps he and his administration, with the help of international partners, need to fix some of the damage that's been done by 14 years of warfare before the idea of elections can be entertained?
Well, 2 things. Number one, absolutely reestablishing security, number one. And number 2, getting a process started to rebuild the economy. Those are absolute priorities. You are totally right. However, at the same time, you can begin to lay a groundwork for eventual political evolution. For example, the country just held a sort of indirect election for a temporary parliament, but there was no political party law. And Syrians, I think, in order to evolve into a more stable political entity, are going to need, for example, political parties and political associations. And those the government is not looking with favor towards.
Okay, so we've talked a bit earlier in the conversation about what Syria wants from the United States. What do you think President Trump wants to achieve and gain from this relationship with Syria's new leader?
I think the Trump administration, like its predecessors in the White House, views the number one priority in Syria as counterterrorism and ensuring that the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria doesn't regain a strong foothold from which it could threaten the United States or other allies, for example, in Europe, Middle East. That is the number one priority. And to the extent that Ahmed Sharaa can cooperate and help on that, he will gain favor in Donald Trump's eyes. The second thing, which I think Donald Trump really would like to see, is an expansion of the Abraham Accords to include Syria. That means a normalization of relations between Damascus and Jerusalem. I think that is still some distance away.
Why is Syria so important? Why do you think it's been taken so seriously as a dossier by the Trump administration?
I think the Trump administration in the Middle East is still very concerned with the counterterrorism dossier. And so Syria plays a big role in that. I should include there Hezbollah and Iranian influence. The Trump administration, it takes a tough line on Iranian influence in the Middle East, as did the Biden administration and the first Trump administration before this Trump administration. Sharaa is vehemently against Hezbollah influence in Syria. That's another area where the United States and Syria can cooperate. And because Sharaa is against Iranian influence and Hezbollah influence in Syria, that is a plus for Israeli national security interests.
Iran was, of course, close to the leadership and the regime of Bashar al-Assad, as was Russia. Have those two relationships, Russia and Iran, now been entirely eclipsed, would you say, by this new fledgling but thriving relationship between Washington and Damascus?
Well, I think it is a fledgling relationship. I like that characterization. Sharaa was just in Moscow recently and talked about, for example, security arrangements, military equipment, and such things, and also the possibility of Russian involvement in the reconstruction of Syria's oil and power sectors. So it's not right to say that the relationship between Syria and Russia is entirely cast aside or marginalized. But I think Sharaa understands that American and Western capabilities to help Syria, A, get past sanctions, and B, bring in private investment working with Gulf states is far greater than anything Russia can do for Syria economically.
Right, and knowing Syria as you do, and knowing the Syrian people, and having been there recently, you've been there this year already and seen the new leadership in place. I mean, what would be the public reaction to any sort of engagement between Damascus and Moscow, knowing that Russia propped up Bashar al-Assad, Russian warplanes obliterated towns and ensured that period of violence was as long as it was. I mean, do you really think the Syrian people would accept having some sort of relationship with Russia moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I was there in January, about 10 months ago, I met a number of fighters from Ahmed Sharaa's HTS militia group, and they were, how would I say it, very angry with Russia. And I met some people whose homes had actually been bombed by Russian aircraft. So I don't think there's any love lost between the Syrian public writ large and the Russian government. But I also have to say, I think the Syrians now want peace. They want good relations with as many states as they can, perhaps with the exception of Iran. And they would accept help rebuilding from just about any quarter, whether it's Western interest, Gulf interest, China, even Russia. The priority, I think, for the population is reestablishing some degree of economic stability and eventually prosperity.
Russia is, of course, where Bashar al-Assad is understood to be residing these days. He fled there on the 8th of December, so almost exactly 11 months ago. Was that a day you ever predicted? And what do you think is going to happen to him?
No, I have to say I was shocked at the speed with which the Assad government collapsed 11 months ago. I think many observers were, but I certainly was. And I think many Syrians were surprised as well. I think perhaps even Ahmed was a little surprised at how quickly the regime fell.
Okay, and of course, uniting Syria is an enormous task. It's extremely complicated, and you know better than anyone the fabric of Syrian society and the complexities of it. How would you assess the progress and the achievements of President al-Sharaa in bringing about the unification of this country?
The good news is that Syria has not become another Libya in the wake of the Assad government's collapse. That's good news. It's not another Libya, but there is an enormous distance to go in terms of helping the country reintegrate different communities into a broader fabric that supports the government in Damascus. So, for example, Kurdish communities in northeastern Syria and the Druze community in southern Syria around Suwaida, both they reject flatly that the central government should take the lead in, for example, providing security in their towns and in their cities. They reject a fiat from Damascus about what the shape of the next government should be. And so there's a long distance to go. The absence of any kind of transitional justice mechanism, which would hold people accountable for human rights violations, both those committed by the Assad government, but also those committed by Shara's security forces and security forces under the Syrian Democratic Forces leadership in northeastern Syria, the Kurdish militia there, and the Druze militia in Suwaida. The absence of any kind of transitional justice mechanism there is delaying progress.
And just lastly, I mean, you've been in Syria earlier on this year. I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously that was quite a while ago. It was in January, but I wonder whether anything struck you about the difference between today's Syria and the Syria you knew when Bashar al-Assad was still in power.
I think the number one difference is that people have hope and people are free to express their opinions. And so you have protests. For example, in Damascus a couple of months ago, there were protests about rent prices in the old city of Damascus. Civil servants have protested because of delays getting their payments. Civil society groups have held protests because they're worried about the government restricting their operations. So that kind of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly was completely absent during the Assad administration, or the Assad regime, I should say. But there's a very long way to go, very long way.
Will you be going back anytime soon?
Oh, I don't know. We'll see.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Robert Ford, US Ambassador to Syria during the years 2011 to 2014. Thank you for your time, sir.